You also need to consider advanced variables like vectors or arrays and matrices. What these array variables are, they're lists or vectors, matrices of data. They can be 1 to n dimensional. They can be very long or very short in one dimension. And it is important that you are clear on the bookkeeping of what each dimension represents in your variable. And sometimes, you try to come up with a very complex data structure that contains everything in one, but it doesn't really make sense to have such a complex data structure. So the bookkeeping and keeping a clear mind on what is really going on in your variable is important. And maybe you can even simplify things and kind of outsource some of the components of more complex variables into a simpler one. Anyway, that's a tangent. Instead of a single value, they hold many values. So it's maybe a stack of boxes rather than a single box. And the sequence of boxes is accessed by the index number. So this is maybe box 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this is their new name, and this overall stack of boxes has the vector name. Okay. A Python list is a different data type than a NumPy array. This is probably going to mean nothing to you right now, but save it to your own memory. It is important to keep that in mind, that Python can have different ways to provide almost similar data structures. And that doesn't mean they're identical. They still have a different type, right? There's a list type and there's a NumPy array type. And you cannot just replace one with the other. Or if you use a NumPy Python list in NumPy functions, and they don't understand that list, even though it stores basically things in an almost identical way, not going too much into detail here, right? Like big concepts, it is still important to know that you might get an error that the NumPy function cannot understand or handle this list because it doesn't have certain functionalities. Okay. The shells generally allow only vectors, so 1D collections of values. Cool, so here's an example. I'm making a simple list. I call it my list. It's assigned the value here, square brackets, indicates that this is a list. It's a symbol in the Python programming language for list. And then there's a sequence of values here, 23, 14, something, something. They are separated by comma. So that's the correct syntax to make a list. If I print my list, I get it back here. If I access my list at index 1, I get 14. Haha. Think back to what I told you earlier, that indexing in Python starts at 0. So this is index 0, this is index 1, this is index 2, this is index 3, right? We're often ending up with off by 1 errors where you're indexing, you really want the first value and you write 1, but it should be 0. So another thing, computer science counting starts often with 0. Some other programming languages like MATLAB start at 1. It's more fun, right? So let's look at this here, right? Here's an index, 0, 1, 2, 3, and the values at 0 is 23, at 1 is 14, at 2 is 3456, and at 3 is 99. Couple more examples. Here is a numeric list. It really depends on the programming languages, what that could look like. In Python, it could look something like this, that you have an integer, you have a floating point number, you have nothing in here, it's empty. It's not 0, because 0 is a value. It's just an empty, it's a box you open up, nothing's in there. There isn't even a 0 in there, just nothing. And then you continue 1, 42, etc., and some zeros. Okay, and that means that if this is called my list and I go to index number 2, I get 23.3. Many programming languages do not allow mixed types. So these would then all be printed as floating point numbers, so there would be a 0.0 added. Strings are often also saved as lists. So here, hello world and some exclamation points are can be understood as an index. So if I in Python say x equals hello world, or x is assigned the value hello world. Sorry for my mix-up here. Got to be careful with what the equal sign really means in a programming language. And then I want to check at element 1, which would be, should give me E, but I'm using the wrong brackets. I'm looking here, I get string object is not callable. That means that the round function would indicate that x is, the round braces here would indicate that x is a function, but it's not, it's a list. So Python thinks that you think that this is a function, it's not a function. So it's telling you, again, it's not gonna think, hey, but there's an X that is a string, so I'm gonna be using that instead. No, you've got to use the right brackets. So square brackets here, 1 gives you E, which is the E of hello.